from a younger age, I realized I had an attraction to women, and immediately, I put in there a whole bunch of excerpts straight from jw.org of how they view homosexuality and what that looks like. And so then that was another thing that I put upon myself of, God, I'm just so defective. I'm so wrong. God's going to kill me. Like, I go over a lot of that in my book of what these types of things do to children.
Hello there, I'm Lloyd Evans. Welcome to The Attic. As many of you know, I like to interview fellow ex-cult members, and today I'm delighted to welcome an author to the channel, author of the book HOAX. It's my pleasure to welcome Pony Jean Parker.
Hi.
Pony, you very graciously sent me a copy of your book, which is here. I have it. Maybe Tibor can be very gracious and show it prominently there.
Thank you.
Its title is HOAX, A Woman's Journey to Reveal the Indoctrination of the Jehovah's Witness Cult, Addiction, and Mental Health Diagnoses. And I have to say, I'm making my way through it. It's very, very raw and direct and candid.
Mm-hmm.
You really don't mince your words, and it's fascinating. So viewers, do check it out. What's it been like getting your story out there in print?
It's really been such an incredible journey. I will start off by saying that I initially had the idea to write this for myself because of some of the things that I deal with the trauma from things that have happened. My memory is not the greatest. So it kind of started out as like a legacy piece so I could have it. I think maybe had it for my kids. I think I was thinking at the time. And I got connected with a friend of a friend who is a book publisher, and I got her on the phone for some advice. I ended up talking to her for 3 hours, and she was like, I have to have this book. And then I immediately was like, oh, great. Now I have to do it. That was a little overwhelming. So it took me about 2 years. And I think like some of the best advice that she gave me is to write it with the focus on what I'm trying to convey or what I want to get out there. So like the entire fuel behind this was for me to share my story, for others to understand that they were not the only ones who've gone through some of these things. It wasn't like this is what I've done, don't do it, or this is what I've done, do it. So it took me 2 years to write it. It wasn't fun. I would love to say that it was fun. It wasn't. There were parts, I think I went 6 months at one point without writing at all because I was just totally over the whole thing. But I'm super proud of it. It still hasn't really hit me that I did it. In writing it, I think you may relate to this because I know you've obviously written books before, is like the impact wasn't really there initially because it was just me and my laptop. So I didn't realize what I was doing or what I was putting out there. But it's been great. I've had a lot of people reach out to me and say how much it's moved them. And so I feel like I've done what I came to do by sharing the story, and as raw as possible. Kind of, you already mentioned it's a little aggressive.
Well, hey, given what you've been through,
right? No, totally.
I'm not holding it against you.
Yeah.
But I definitely relate to what you say about it being a challenging process. And, when I was writing my first book, it's a little bit of a leap of faith because you're obviously investing huge amounts of time and emotional energy, in the case of a memoir, into something that you don't fully know whether it will actually turn into a book, because that's obviously the goal. That's why you're doing it. But it's purely down to you to first of all finish it, and then it's like, well, then I have to navigate the whole publishing process and editing and all that kind of thing. And who knows when it will actually end up being an actual book. But I still have to start writing now. I still have to kind of break ground and do the heavy lifting now as though it actually will happen. So I think that's a real challenge for any writer, and for you to kind of overcome that and do so in a way that, you know, not only provides you with self-validation, but will also be very, very relatable to other people who've been through a similar experience. I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, and that's kind of why when I was going through it, once I realized that this was actually going to be a thing, my first initial thought is like I would do this, we would publish it, and me and all my friends would buy it, and then like it would kind of just like go away. So I had this idea that like I've read, I'm a big reader myself, so I've read many other books of many people's stories from all different backgrounds, and I feel like obviously not all of them, but for a bigger part of them, there was kind of that piece missing that kind of just like hits you where you're like, I can't believe somebody's actually going to admit that and say that kind of thing. So I really went for it. For those of you that have not seen the book or read it, like it's super detailed.
No holds barred. It goes everywhere.
I even include all of there's photocopies in the back of the book at the end of the entire history of my treatment. So like I'm literally not holding anything back. It is all there because I think that was kind of part of the message is like, I want you to see how bad it was and how it can get better.
I did notice that. And I'm glad that you've touched on that because, you know, we're talking now about essentially almost medical records. You know, you're providing actual copies in the back of the book of the you know, the summary information that's been provided by your clinician, and so you're saying that this was, you know, was this like a cathartic thing, or you know, what I'm wondering is, in your mind, when a reader gets to that part, do you feel comfortable with them going word for word through every word of what's been written in what are essentially your medical records?
Yes, I went through everything myself.
Yeah.
And the two therapists that I've had since everything happened with me leaving the cult were so gracious and fully on board with writing clinical reports of my treatment with them as well. And I told them, like, don't write it like you were writing it to another professional, you know. I had to block out some parts of names and of doctors that don't want to be in there because I don't want to get sued. But I was like, this is the best way to make this impact for it to just, you can really feel how brutally honest this is, you know. And in the moment, kind of like I said before, it was just me in my laptop. So I didn't really have that cathartic kind of, because it didn't really hit me what I was doing. But since it's been out, and I think like my cathartic release and everything comes from all the people that have reached out to me that have read it and shared how they feel and parts they relate and didn't and whatnot. Like that's the part that's cathartic and healing for me, because I feel like it helps me feel not so alone too, you know, because I still struggle with that sometimes. We all do, I think.
Indeed. And, you know, it adds to the kind of, in a way, the mountain of evidence or testimony against the Jehovah's Witness organization, because, you know, if an organization is benign and doesn't have any skeletons in its closet and is completely harmless, it's not going to have, you know, dozens of YouTube channels and dozens of books and memoirs detailing all of the ways in which it's screwed people over. You know, there's no smoke without fire, really, you know, when it comes to organizations of this nature. So I think it's really important that those who are able to, because my personal opinion is that just making it out vertically and with your cognitive functions, you know, ticking over is itself a huge victory, and you deserve a medal for it. But to go one step further and to kind of pay it forward and provide healing resources to add to this kind of mountain of evidence is hugely helpful. And I'm really glad that you and others are doing this.
I appreciate that. I just remember so vividly to touch a little bit on some of the stories. So I was born and raised Jehovah's Witness. And then when I decided to leave, I mean, a lot of stuff happened, obviously. When I decided to leave, my entire family disowned me and had my children legally taken from me. So I can so vividly remember being in that moment and feeling like I was literally like the only person in the world that has ever gone through this. And just the gut-wrenching, isolated feeling of that and the brokenness and like, I'm just such a horrible person that this happened because I'm so evil, you know, and it just, God, I just don't want anyone to ever feel like that. And when I went through all of this, none of this stuff existed on a social media platform like this, the way that it's developed now. So yeah, I agree with kind of what you were saying, like to be able to put this out there, to be comforting and healing for others, I think is really near and dear to my heart.
I obviously don't want to spoil the book for those that haven't read it yet. So yeah. We're treading a bit of a minefield there, but right. Since you've mentioned one detail, I'm just going to throw out another one, sure. which was very chilling for me, and it's in the first chapter where you describe basically sexual overtures that were made to you at the age of 12. Yes. And that was very, very chilling. And it really speaks to, even though you weren't, it seems, abused at that point, aside from the psychological trauma of the situation, right. It really speaks to how widespread abuse is within the organization.
Yes, absolutely. And I would say, I hate to say the fact that wasn't the only instance. I've had other instances that I could not include in the book because of the other people involved, and I cannot legally state things like that. But it was a very common theme in the lifetime that I had inside of the organization that was around, and it was played off so like it wasn't a big deal, you know, like it didn't, we just moved somebody to a different congregation and we're just not going to talk about it. And so it's kind of creepy to think that was such a sense of normalcy for a long time, of like, that it was okay to be so hush hush about it and like nobody talk about it or admit it, or like it was just that simple of a thing to sweep under the rug, you know? Looking back on it, it's like, how did this get like this, letting this to happen for so long, you know? It's so disturbing.
And we're talking as well about an organization that prides itself on shepherding the flock, on right. almost providing a service to people. You know, we're doing this right. as a favor to you, you know. Right. This isn't about control. We're here to make your life easier. And yet again, you know, this very raw, candid account tells the story of a woman who is essentially kicked around and neglected by the organization to the point where addiction becomes a problem. And addiction is something I haven't really spoken about too much yet on this channel, okay. Or maybe not enough. You know, if you could summarize, you know, what you've learned about dealing with addiction from the point of view of an ex-cult member, I think that would be really useful, because surely being in a cult doesn't make things any easier.
Right. So this is kind of how I always speak about it. And when I talk to people about, when I bring up, you know, my battle with addiction and my struggle with addiction, things that I went through is things like alcohol and drugs and other vices like that are such an easy thing to fall into, because it's so effective at letting you ignore everything and numbing all your emotions and getting fit. Like, I would be lying if I said it didn't work. It worked for many years. You know what I mean? It doesn't work overall, but like, I think I understand and I have so much sympathy for people who go down that road, because it is such a useful tool of like being able to mask and forget and all that stuff. But I think still there's such a stigma about addiction and mental health that people don't even want to admit it, even if they realize when they're doing it, because they feel defective. So now you're already defective because you were in this cult and you come out and you lose all your family and all these things are happening, right? And now you're an addict. So then it's like, you don't want to own up to it then either, because that you're just adding fuel to the fire of you're being defective, right? When in reality, that was your coping mechanism. So it's, in a lot of ways, it's not as like deep rooted in how defective you are as people may start to believe that they are, if that makes sense. It's, you use this to deal and to get through, and it got you here. You're still here, right? So now let's try to change into healthy coping mechanisms as opposed to using drug or alcohol to, fill those things. And I think that's kind of like the best way that I could describe it to others, is to bring a normalcy to it, where it's taking the stigma out of it is like, it's really not, I mean, it's a big deal, but I think you understand what I'm saying. Like, we just have to change your coping mechanisms. Like, don't be like, I'm a waste now. Like, you know what I mean? Like, there is a way that you can overturn this and turn this over.
Do you feel like there might be like an element of self-fulfilling prophecy at play as well? Because when you are raised as one of Jehovah's Witnesses, it's drilled into you that, you're in like a protective bubble where everyone's happy and there is total bliss. And on the outside are these sort of depraved, debauched beings who are just basically given over entirely to, drugs and alcohol. And if you leave this protective bubble, you're going to become like one of those people. And as a result, you're going to be worthy of destruction at Armageddon. So, if you even kind of cross that threshold into experimenting or starting to self-medicate, because you feel like you've crossed this red line, you immediately feel, well, I'm damned now. There's no going back. I might as well go all the way. Whereas typically someone might experiment, but because they don't feel damned, they are able to do things in a little bit more moderation or pull back entirely if they have a harmful experience.
Right. Totally. And I even talk about it in the book a little bit. Like, in my early 20s, I kind of was, floating in and out of being in it. And anytime I kind of was going out into the world and doing things, everything was seemingly going wrong. And I definitely had those moments where it was like, this is my own fault. This is because Jehovah hates me because I'm doing all these things wrong. So I see where it's very easy to fall into that line of thinking of like, where you'll just go deeper and deeper down because of, like you were saying, how people of the world are portrayed to us as like, and if you go out into the world, then just everything's going to be wrong. You're a horrible person and you're out murdering everyone. Like, all these things that are just like super excessive, right? When in reality, you're just like a normal person who has a brunch with friends on the weekend and you like a cigarette. I don't know. Like, it's really just not that. But I see where you can get caught up in that mindset. And I can't say that it's not, and hear what I'm saying, but it's brilliant that they've thought of it to do it that way. It's very manipulative. Like, they have figured it out. Like, so, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I guess, the extent to which it's deliberate or not, I think is a little bit up for debate. I think, look, there are lots of groups that do this. And sometimes I think it's just a case of almost like a form of evolution where, lots of manipulative groups or cults settle on the same control tactics,
right?
Just because they work best. They don't necessarily embark on having these control mechanisms, but they kind of gravitate towards them because it's the easiest way of doing it, so that you get to a point where there are dozens or hundreds of these groups, all with pretty much the same methods of controlling people, even though they have wildly different theologies and ideologies.
Right. I agree. Yeah.
And you also, you're very candid. In addition to talking about addiction, you obviously, we've discussed the mental health. And, you also talk about, the impact of the organization's sexual repression. And, this is something I've spoken about on the channel, because I really do feel that, the way that people's sexual identities and their sex lives and most intimate aspects of themselves are policed has a really crushing impact on people's kind of development as human beings.
Absolutely.
You would agree with that, right?
Yes. I do believe things of that nature are natural and human. And I think leading away with children and young adults of just a full unloading of how dirty it is, and it's shameful, and it's thin, and like all of these things, it's just setting that foundation for just completely just toxic, unrealistic view of these things that then ends up building all of this trauma for the future that is just devastating, I think, to do to human beings in general. Like, I'm not saying, obviously, to just be so, grossly descriptive about things to young children. I'm obviously not saying that, but for me, I was just always taught that it just was so looked down upon, and it was dirty and shameful. And also, I talk about in the book that from a younger age, I realized I had an attraction to women, and immediately, I put in there a whole bunch of excerpts straight from jw.org of how they view homosexuality and what that looks like. And so then that was another thing that I put upon myself of, God, I'm just so defective. I'm so wrong. God's going to kill me. Like, I go over a lot of that in my book of what these types of things do to children, and all of the science behind your development from birth to age 8, how it lays that foundation for the future, for everything to develop as it should. And to have all those things put on you is so detrimental, where then it leads to all of these things where you have toxicity in really harmful relationships, when you're an adult, or even how you view those things for yourself. But in reality, things are just like, this is who we are as human beings, to be able to do these things. And it's not bad,
It feels like, the sexual repression, apart from, creating very sort of self-destructive tendencies in some people, it also creates a very uneven playing field, because typically, or how it's supposed to work, is that when you grow up, you can go out and you can decide for yourself who your sexual partner is going to be and what the parameters of your relationship are going to be. Whereas when you're in the Jehovah's Witness organization, it's like you're going out nowhere. We've decided on who it is that you're going to be attracted to, and what sort of person you're going to be attracted to, and what their belief structure is, and what the rules of your relationship are going to be. So immediately you're limited, and immediately you're going to end up in a relationship that you would never have been in if the choice was truly down to you, and if you weren't having these things controlled.
Right. And I've always had this like argument when it comes to that, like, and I thought about this from when I was like a teenager, how for those exact things that you just said, where it's like, you're only supposed to date within the cult, and you have to have a chaperone at all times, and you can't do anything like you could even get in trouble for holding hands, like all these ridiculous things, right? And then you have this part of literature where it says if there's anything wrong in your relationship or your marriage or whatever, that you need to read the Bible together more and everything is going to fix it, and like everything will make your relationship perfect. And then I would go around thinking, well, if this is true, then you can literally take any female and male in the organization and force them to get married and tell them to read the Bible, and then their marriage is going to be perfect. So like, that's how that works, right? Obviously that's not how that works.
Indeed.
But it's when you stop to think about it, and that's some of the things that I went through as, a teenager into young adult, where these are the types of thoughts I was having, where I was like, this isn't adding up. Like, that's really what started getting my wheels turning. Like, I think I talk about it in the book of, we weren't allowed to have friends who were worldly, but we were supposed to go out and try to get them to become a witness. But I couldn't be friends with them, but I want them to, like, that never made sense to me. You know what I mean? Like things like that.
Yeah. Or if you get into a conversation that might lead to them developing an interest in joining the religion, it would be with them assuming that you are their friend when in fact you're not. You're
right,
only,
but so they're
or
my
at least
friend,
you're not supposed to be. Yeah.
But I'm not supposed to be your friend, but you're my friend because I want you to come over here. Like none of it adds up.
Yeah. When I described about how you were very raw and direct in your book, one way in which you've been very direct is in using the C word, in using the word cult. In fact, I'm looking at page one. Page one, you've said we all fell victim to that cult. So presumably you gave this a bit of thought. I mean, when I was writing my book, I did obviously use the word cult, but I was kind of falling over myself to explain why I feel that word is appropriate. Whereas you use it very, very unapologetically. And presumably that was a conscious decision. Yeah,
because I'm just going to tell the truth. Like it's a cult, the end. Like, do you know what I mean? And also, and I mention it in the epilogue of the book, is like, I wrote this book for a purpose and a reason, to a specific like box of people who are leaving or have left this cult, right? But also, I also wanted it to be universal to people from any high control religion. So I think it was kind of like a twofold reason why, but I wanted definitely to make the impact for people to understand really what this is. Because I think in my journey since having left, and I have these discussions with people out in the world about my story, they always are like, LDS, that's a cult. Scientology, that's a cult. Like, they're on board. And then when they realize the cult I was raised in, they're like, are you sure? Are you sure that's a cult? So I feel like that was part of it too, where I was like, no, let's make this real clear. This goes right in line with the table.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
For sure.
And when you were getting help with your mental health, which again is another big theme in your book, and again, I don't want to spoil things too much, but were you able to find a practitioner who understood cults and was able to give you help that was kind of tailor-made for people who'd been through that particular form of trauma?
So I'll be very honest with you. The two therapists that I had a really good connection with had no experience with it. They did take their time to learn about it. And I also started off doing, which I always refer this to people, this idea, because for me, it worked very well, but they have people who are trying to get licensed. So they're considered an intern, but the intern has to relay every single thing to like the licensed practitioner in the office. So it's almost like you have two therapists on your side now. And that always worked really well for me. And it sounds like it's not.
The more the merrier. Come in. Yeah.
But it's, like there is literally
Mm.
one time that I started with an intern and I saw her for a couple of weeks. And then she literally reached out to me and she's like, oh, my boss is going to sit in with us on the next session. And I went in and she was like, the boss therapist. I'll just call her that. She was like, I'm going to take over because there's a lot going on here that's outside of her. And in that moment, I was like, oh my God, I'm close to winning therapy. I'm like, I'm getting from the next level boss to the next level. Make a joke out of it. But I do think it's definitely changed since I started and since I left. It's been about 11 years since I've like really exited. There has been so much change and movement in therapists out there and licensed practitioners that have that background now. I've noticed it even more so since I've moved to the South because I live in Nashville, Tennessee. I'm originally from California. There's a lot of practitioners here that have that kind of core that they were the ones who actually were in it growing up, and then they've turned towards us to help others. But, and I know that there's a lot of therapists out there now who were also Jehovah's Witnesses, but I would say I think it's necessary, but in my experience, I didn't have it, and I still was able to get through it, you know? But yeah, I mean, I guess
because ultimately a good therapist is going to understand feelings of loss, feelings of anxiety,
exactly.
Irrespective of what's triggering them.
Exactly. Yeah. So at the end of the day, what I went through was a complex post-traumatic stress disorder type of situation. And they have the training and all the knowledge of somebody who's been through a situation like that. So yeah.
Do you think you ever fully recover from PTSD or trauma that's imposed or inflicted by a cult?
No. I'm a very firm believer in that. And I think the difference that's made from, I think that was like, and I talk about this in the book too, that was one of my struggles for the longest time is I felt like I would get frustrated because I'm like, when am I done? When am I healed? I'm doing the work. I'm doing this. And I still have the effects and I still have the memories. And that's kind of was stunting me for some point because I was like, when am I done? When am I healed? Like, where's the end? You know? And I think the true healing comes in you understanding that it's never going to go away, but that you have tools and knowledge of how to live a beautiful life despite and live this beautiful life with it. And once I came to that realization, just a whole world of difference opened up for me, where it's almost like I have healed, even though I know I'm always going to have to work with this. It just changed that whole playing field where it wasn't so combative about where I'm getting to in healing and when is the end, when am I fixed? I was very fixated on being fixed.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of us feel like that at times, you know, like.
I think it's natural, isn't it? If something's wrong, it's like, okay, how do I fix this? You know,
right.
What Google page should I go to? Which Wikipedia article is going to help me fix this problem?
Right.
Only some problems don't ever fully get fixed. What you can aspire to is managing them and not being controlled by them, but being in control of them. And I think that's the best thing you can aspire to with cults. Yeah,
totally. And I think that rolls into mental health as well, because another, big purpose of this book was to try to get rid of some of that stigma. And that's why I was so raw and honest about my diagnoses and the symptoms that I have and the ways that I outwardly show them. It doesn't make you weird or wrong. Like there's so many people in the world that struggle from these things. And if we all just talked about it more, it would be so much better for everybody. because everyone would just feel so much like lighter and able to accept that they need help and find it, because it would just be normalized. You know, that's such a big spot for me in my heart of that as well. And I don't think there's anybody coming out of this cult or any cult that doesn't have some sort of mental illness. I want to be very honest. I would find that very hard to believe.
Again, hard for me to argue with you.
Right.
So talk me through the experience of, you know, going through being in a cult like Jehovah's Witnesses as a woman, because obviously, you know, my experience in many ways was the same. I went through the same sort of sexual repression and things like that. But obviously, I'm very mindful of the fact that, you know, there's a very different power dynamic at play when you're growing up in this organization as a male versus growing up as a woman. Talk me through, you know, what it's like to, you know, grow up with these sorts of limitations that are attached to you purely based on your gender.
I don't think I came into the realization for the most part of how extensive it is until I had left. So being in it, you don't realize how completely sexist and chauvinistic these things are. I grew up with, and I still struggle with, the idea that whoever I'm in a relationship with or who I was married to had complete control over my body and what to do with it and when to do it and this and that and the other. And there was nothing I could do about it. And that's like the most frightening idea.
Because of the principle of headship, the man is the head of the woman.
Yeah. And not having a valid say in anything. Like there's so many publications out there that are like, you know, the man, head of the household, he's the final word. He's the one who says what goes and all those things. And us not having any value within the congregation too. Like, it may seem like a little thing, but it's actually a big thing in showcasing the hierarchy of how women are valued compared to men in a big picture, you know. And you grow up feeling very inadequate and feeling very much like a lesser sex. And it messes with your self-esteem and self-worth, because you always feel like a man is always going to know better than you and needs to tell you what to do and how to do it. And it's awful. And I think when I first came out of it, there was a lot of things where I kind of was going to extremes because I didn't really know what I was doing. So then I became a very aggressive partner to have, right? I had to be in control. I was saying what was going on. I was going to be the one, because it was like, you know, like a one extreme to other, which happens in a lot of traumatizing circumstances. Like, that's how your reaction ends up being from it.
Bit of an overcompensation.
Exactly. So, you know, I think for me, the most disturbing one, though, is all of the articles about how to handle your rapist as a woman. And I know that has been going around for years and people have seen it, but it's to say that you're supposed to have compassion for your rapist because of what he may be going through. And that if your husband physically hits you, that you're supposed to figure out what you're doing that is causing him to do that and not do it anymore, is like just the most mind-blowing things looking back on it now. And also mind-blowing that I can remember when I was in it, it made sense to me. Those answers made sense to me. Like, that's insane. Do you know what I mean? Like, realize in hindsight, I'm like, I can't believe I ever believed that was like, okay. So being identifying as a female and in this cult was definitely very repressive and very just, you are just such a lesser human being, you know?
And there was no real way for that to be challenged.
No.
Unless in very specific situations. For example, I can remember we had a wedding in our Kingdom Hall, and obviously extended family, some of whom weren't Jehovah's Witnesses, were attending. And at some point during the wedding talk, the speaker must have been saying something along the lines of the husband being the Christian head and the one who's responsible. And I can vividly remember someone in the audience, a woman in the audience going, just like audibly so everyone could hear. And thinking back, that was inevitable. If you're going to have weddings where you can invite kind of worldly people, and then you're going to spout this overtly misogynist, BS, obviously people are going to react. But apart from that specific situation, these ideas don't come up against any pushback, do they? You just believe that this is the normal way of doing things.
Correct. And I think, and I can only speak from my experience, I was born and raised into it. So when you think about it from that way, there was nothing else that I knew to be able to compare it to. So this was reality for me, and I can see now why that was so easy for me to accept and believe that it was the way this should be done or handled or whatever, because I didn't know anything else. Like I'm wildly curious to hear a viewpoint of somebody who, came in as a teenager or a young adult, how they felt about accepting this ideology. I feel would be a really interesting perspective. But for me, it was very much just I didn't know anything different, That's just, that's what it is.
I can relate to that.
Yeah.
Well, listen, I've really enjoyed this discussion, and it's very gracious of you to come on the channel and talk about your book. And viewers, you really should check it out if you can. There it is again. HOAX, very easy. It's literally just 4 letters, so you can remember that very easily when you're going on Amazon. Pony, could you just answer the question I typically ask at the end of my interviews, which is if anyone's watching this as maybe a believing Jehovah's Witness who's on the fence and they're wondering whether to challenge their indoctrination and whether to start unpicking perhaps some traumatic elements from their Jehovah's Witness upbringing, what would be your advice to them?
Kind of going along with the theme of the book, I'm just going to be very honest and direct about it. It's going to suck and it's not going to be easy. I promise you it is worth it on the other side, but please, please, please understand that you are not alone. And there are so many of us out there that are so willing to help and point you in the right direction and give you the right resources to help, and always be there to listen if you need someone to talk to. Like you're not out there alone. I know you may lose your family. I know you may be losing your family, but there are so many of us that have been on this road that can help you through it. And so many ways that we can show you that this is a reality that you can have, but I would never say just deciding to leave and then you leave and then it's all like rainbows. It's not like that. Even after everything I've been through, there's so many things I wish I never would have done or happened or anything, but the overall feeling of this is I am so glad that I left. I've had so many beautiful experiences and so many beautiful things that I learned about myself. And I never would have if I was still in it, and there's so many traumatic things that have ended because of leaving it. So I think that is my message to anybody who may be secretly watching right now.
Oh, there will be some, you can be sure of it. And I'm sure they will derive immense help from your experience.
And I urge anybody watching this who has read the book or is interested in reading the book, please reach out to me when you're done. Like, I love hearing from y'all because it helps me as well, And I think there is the power in that community of all of us understanding that we are not alone, right?
Indeed. You have an Instagram profile, and I will put the required link in the description so people can reach out to you. But Pony, I've really enjoyed our conversation. I hope we can get you back on the channel at some point, because I'm sure that
that'd be awesome.
There's more we can talk about. But for now, that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Viewers, I hope you've enjoyed our conversation. Don't forget that you can watch other interviews by subscribing to the Lloyd Evans channel, but that's all we have time for. Thank you so much for watching.